Alright, settle in, folks, because you are not going to believe the story I'm about to tell you. You ever have one of those neighbors? The kind that just gets under your skin? The kind that makes you question your sanity, your patience, and, in my case, even the structural integrity of your own darn mailbox? Yeah, I had one. Her name was Blythe Carrington, a name that still sends a little shiver down my spine, not of fear, mind you, but of sheer exasperation. She was the HOA president of our oh-so-perfect little enclave, Crestview Estates. And let me tell you, our little, let's call it a disagreement. Well, it didn't just turn my quiet suburban life upside down. It ripped the perfectly manicured veneer right off this whole neighborhood and exposed some secrets, some deep-seated issues that I don't think anyone, especially Blythe, was ready for. So grab your coffee. I know I've got mine. Because this is the story of how a simple, repeated act of vehicular assault on my poor, unsuspecting mailbox escalated into a full-blown neighborhood drama. It's a tale of rules, a whole lot of hypocrisy, a dash of engineering genius, if I do say so myself, and how sometimes, just sometimes, standing up for what's right, even if it's just for your right to receive your mail without it being mangled, can turn the tables in ways you never expected. What happened next? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Secrets, my friends, secrets no one saw coming. My name is Vaughn Royston. I'm a structural engineer by trade, a man of facts, figures, calculations. I like things to make sense, to be logical, to be, well, structurally sound. And Crestview Estates, on the surface, was exactly that. It was the kind of neighborhood where every blade of grass seemed to be trimmed to an exacting, almost unnerving perfection with a tiny pair of scissors. Seriously, I wouldn't have been surprised. Every mailbox, except mine eventually, stood ramrod straight and proud, gleaming in the sun like little soldiers of conformity. And the rules. Oh, the sacred HOA rules. They were followed to the letter, every single one, or so you'd think. Unless, of course, you were the HOA president. Then, apparently, the rules were more like suggestions. Flexible guidelines, perhaps? Blythe Carrington. Picture this. A woman who ruled our quiet enclave like a queen with an iron fist cleverly hidden beneath a velvet glove. Or maybe a silk glove, the expensive kind, the kind that could still deliver a surprisingly sharp slap if you crossed her. She was legendary, for enforcing the HOA bylaws with what I can only describe as surgical precision. No one, and I mean no one, dared to paint their front door the wrong shade of beige. And believe me, there were only 3 approved shades of beige. You wouldn't dream of leaving a garden gnome, even a tastefully discreet one, out of its designated, pre-approved gnome zone. She had an eagle eye for the slightest infraction, a sixth sense for an unkempt hedge or a trash can left out an hour too long. She could spot a blade of grass that was a millimeter too tall from a moving car. Her SUV, by the way, that's important. But here's the kicker, the part that really started to grind my gears. When it came to her own actions, well, that was a whole different story, wasn't it? A completely different set of bylaws, apparently written in invisible ink that only she could read. Now, you gotta understand, the streets in Crestview Estates, they were narrow. Picturesque, I guess, if you like winding roads that feel like they were designed before cars got quite so substantial. They meandered through rows of houses that were so similar, you'd think they came out of a giant cookie cutter, each with its own perfectly manicured lawn and gleaming white picket fence. It was the suburban dream, or so they said. And Blythe, with her luxury SUV, not a silver one like the one she eventually... Well, we'll get to that. Her personal chariot was a sleek, black machine, the kind that always gleamed, probably buffed daily by an unseen, terrified minion. It was often seen cruising these narrow roads, a silent, imposing predator, but not always without incident. Oh no, not when it came to Maplewood Lane, and specifically, my little patch of perfectly compliant paradise. For months, folks, months, I, Vaughn Royston, your friendly neighborhood structural engineer, had watched with a growing, simmering irritation as Blythe's SUV repeatedly, and I mean repeatedly, clipped my mailbox. We're not talking a gentle, oops, my bad, kind of tap. No, sir. This was often a full-on, metal-on-metal, jarring sideswipe. The kind that left my poor mailbox post leaning like a sailor who'd had one too many rums on shore leave, looking utterly dejected and, frankly, a little bit seasick. The first time it happened, I thought, okay, accidents happen. The roads are a bit tight. I straightened it out, a little annoyed, but willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Then it happened again, and each and every time, Blythe would stop, the powerful engine of her SUV purring contentedly, as if it had just enjoyed a satisfying meal. She'd step out, all 5'0" of her, with that same tight-lipped, almost smile. It was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that I came to interpret as, yes, I did it. What are you going to do about it, Mr. Royston? And she'd offer the exact same, infuriatingly saccharine excuse. Oops, she'd chirp, her voice dripping with false sweetness. These roads are just so narrow, aren't they, Vaughn? Sometimes she'd even add a little, my, your mailbox seems to be a bit wobbly again. As if the mailbox itself was the problem, spontaneously deciding to lurch into her path. Her voice, as I said, was all sugar and spice, but there was a sharp, steely edge hidden just beneath it, like a razor blade tucked into a candy wrapper. It was a dare. She was daring me, daring Vaughn Royston, the quiet man who just wanted to live in peace and have his Amazon packages delivered intact, to say something, to challenge her. But I wasn't one for confrontation, not really. I'm a man who prefers facts over feelings, calculations over chaos. I'd rather spend an afternoon redesigning a bridge support than engage in a petty neighborhood squabble. So, for a while, I just sighed, bought a new post, dug out the old one, reset the mailbox, making sure it was perfectly plumb and at the exact regulation height, of course. I even, after the second time, moved it back a few inches, just in case. Didn't matter. Crunch. Still, even for a patient man like me, and I consider myself pretty patient, there's a limit. After the third time, maybe it was the fourth, they started to blur together into a symphony of metallic shrieks and splintering wood. My patience wasn't just wearing thin, it was practically transparent. It was shredded. It was lying in pieces next to my latest casualty of a mailbox. You see, Vaughn's mailbox, my mailbox, it wasn't just a box on a stick for the mailman. It became a symbol of my quiet, and increasingly less quiet, resistance. Unlike the other neighbors, who mostly had those simple wooden posts or flimsy plastic boxes that looked like they'd blow over in a stiff breeze, mine was a modest but sturdy design. I'd chosen it carefully, thinking it could withstand the occasional bump from a delivery truck or a careless teenager learning to drive. I'm an engineer, after all. I think about these things. Load-bearing capacity, impact resistance, the usual. But Blythe's repeated accidents. They were different. They felt intentional, calculated. They felt like a test of boundaries, a deliberate poking of the bear. And this bear, let me tell you, was getting pretty tired of being poked. It wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about respect. It was about fairness. It was about the sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of it all. Here was Blythe, the self-appointed guardian of Crestview Estates' aesthetic purity, the enforcer of every jot and tittle of the HOA covenant. I'd seen her, with my own eyes, send out those prim, passive-aggressive letters to neighbors for the smallest, most insignificant infractions. An untidy hedge here, a missing house number there, because heaven forbid the pizza delivery guy get confused. Someone's petunias were a shade too vibrant, apparently. I heard about that one. But when it came to her own mistakes, her own blatant disregard for other people's property, she just waved them off with that tight little smile and a shrug. Oops, narrow roads. One afternoon, it was a Saturday, I remember, because I was trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace on my porch, just watching the world go by, or at least, the very small, very beige part of it that was Crestview Estates. I had my arms crossed, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, and I saw it. Blythe's black SUV, glinting in the afternoon sun, turning the corner onto Maplewood Lane. My stomach clenched. I just knew. As usual, she took the curve too sharply, a little too fast. I could almost hear the tires squealing in protest, though that might have just been my imagination, or perhaps my teeth grinding. And then, crunch, that sickening, familiar sound of metal scraping against metal, followed by the dull thud of wood giving way. The front bumper of her pristine SUV, once again, making intimate, unwanted contact with my mailbox. The familiar crunch echoed through the otherwise quiet street. It was a sound that had become the unwanted soundtrack to my life in Crestview. Blythe stepped out, her mascara already a little smudged from the heat, sunglasses perched slightly askew on her perfectly coiffed hair. She gave me that same smile, the one that made me want to test the tensile strength of a 2x4. But this time, something was different. This time, Vaughn Royston didn't return the smile. I didn't sigh. I didn't even look at the mangled remains of what was, just moments before, a perfectly good, regulation-compliant mailbox. I just looked at her, dead in the eye, and said, my voice calm, but firm, the kind of firm that I usually reserve for contractors trying to cut corners on a major construction project. Maybe the road's not the problem, Blythe. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed. The smile flickered and died, replaced by a glacial chill. Careful, Vaughn, she said, her voice losing its sugary coating and revealing the steel beneath. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. I just nodded, slow and deliberate. The gears in my engineer brain were already turning, not with anger anymore, but with a cold, clear purpose. Already planning my next move. Because if Blythe Carrington wanted a game, if she wanted to test me, then fine. I was ready to play, but we were going to play by my rules this time. And my rules involved a lot more concrete and reinforced steel than she was probably accustomed to. The neighborhood, bless their gossiping hearts, watched this whole drama unfold. Some, I could tell, watched with a sort of morbid curiosity, like it was their own private reality TV show. Others, and this was the more frustrating part, seemed to watch with thinly veiled amusement, probably placing bets on how long my latest mailbox would last. Blythe's reputation as the queen of selective enforcement, the neighborhood's own little tyrant, was well known, even if mostly whispered behind cupped hands. But my silent, or rather, increasingly less silent, defiance? That was starting to shift the balance, just a little. It was a quiet battle, fought not with angry words at HOA meetings, though we'd get to those too, but with steel, concrete, and the sheer stubbornness of a man pushed too far. But Blythe? Oh, Blythe wasn't just going to let this slide. She had power, or at least, the illusion of power that came with her HOA presidency. She had influence, connections, and a real knack, I had to admit, for making things happen behind the scenes, usually things that made life inconvenient for anyone who dared to question her authority. I knew that. Yet, I also knew that sometimes, standing up to someone like Blythe, someone who thrived on control and intimidation, meant more than just fixing a mailbox over and over again. It meant challenging the very system she'd built, the system that allowed her to act with impunity while holding everyone else to an impossible standard. It was about fundamental fairness. As the sun dipped lower that fateful Saturday, casting long, dramatic shadows across the street, as if nature itself was setting the stage for the next act, I, Vaughn Royston, made a decision. If Blythe Carrington wanted to keep playing rough, if she thought she could just bulldoze her way through life and my property without consequence, then she was about to find out that an engineer, a structural engineer, can be a very formidable opponent. I would respond in kind, but with a twist. A twist involving precise calculations, high tensile strength materials, and a level of over-engineering that would make her SUV weep. A twist she wouldn't see coming. And let me tell you, this was only the beginning. The beginning of a showdown that would shake Crestview Estates to its perfectly poured concrete core and, in the end, maybe, just maybe, make it a slightly better place to live. So, yes, Vaughn Royston, as I mentioned, is not a man of impulse. I'm an engineer, trained to analyze, to calculate, to design and build solutions with precision. My life revolves around understanding stress points, load-bearing capacities, and the unwavering laws of physics. So, when Blythe Carrington's SUV, that gleaming black symbol of her reign, clipped, no, let's be honest, demolished, my mailbox for what felt like the 100th time. It was actually the 4th, but who's counting when you're repeatedly buying new mailboxes? My response wasn't a flare of anger or a torrent of shouting. Well, not outwardly, anyway. Inwardly, the pressure was building, a critical load threatening to exceed its design limits. No, my response was a decision. A cold, hard, structurally sound decision. I decided to apply my professional skills, the very skills that put food on my table and kept bridges from collapsing, to solve this deeply, and increasingly personal problem. As I stood on my porch that afternoon, watching Blythe drive away with a dismissive wave that I'm sure she thought was charmingly apologetic, but which I knew was a thinly veiled taunt, I started formulating a plan. It wouldn't be a quick fix, no patched up 2x4 this time. It wouldn't be a petty act of revenge, like, say, accidentally over-fertilizing the perfect strip of grass she considered her royal procession route. Oh no, this was going to be an engineering marvel. A calculated move designed to address the root of the issue, namely, Blythe's apparent inability to navigate a turn without using my property as a bumper. The existing mailbox, the one that now lay in a pathetic heap of splintered wood and twisted metal, was flimsy, I'll admit. Standard issue, easily replaced. But I, Vaughn Royston, had something much more robust in mind. I needed a mailbox that could withstand Blythe's, let's call them parking mishaps, without budging an inch. I envisioned a structure that was both perfectly functional, because the mail must get through, HOA queen or no HOA queen, and a statement. A silent, unyielding, concrete and steel testament to my resolve. A monument to my frustration. That very evening, after a dinner I barely tasted, my mind already sketching blueprints and running stress calculations, I retreated to my garage. Now, my garage, that's my sanctuary. My workshop. It's a space I'd converted over the years, a haven of order and precision. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, each in its designated spot, organized with the same meticulous care I applied to my most complex engineering projects. Blueprints and sketches, remnants of past triumphs of logic over chaos, covered my workbench. Each one, in its own way, was a testament to my meticulous nature. I pulled out a fresh notebook, the crisp paper a welcome contrast to the splintered wood outside. I began to sketch designs, not just for a mailbox, but for a fortress. I considered various materials, high-grade steel, reinforced concrete, perhaps even a strategic combination of both. The key was to create a structure that appeared, from a distance at least, perfectly ordinary, something that wouldn't immediately scream declaration of war to the casual observer or, more importantly, to the HOA's aesthetic committee, which, of course, Blythe chaired. But on the inside, or rather, at its core, it needed to be virtually indestructible. I spent hours, days even, poring over stress calculations, load-bearing capacities, and ensuring its structural integrity would be beyond reproach. This wasn't just about building a mailbox anymore. It was about engineering a fortress, a small, defiant outpost on Maplewood Lane. Vaughn Royston knew, with the certainty of a well-calculated stress test, that Blythe wouldn't back down easily. She was used to getting her way. Her reign over Crestview Estates was built on intimidation and the unwavering belief in her own infallibility. I suspected she'd see my new mailbox not as a practical solution to a recurring problem, but as a direct, insolent challenge to her authority. And that's precisely why my plan had to be flawless. I needed to ensure that every single aspect of this new installation was up to code, beyond reproach, that there were no grounds, absolutely no loopholes, for her to complain or, more likely, to take punitive legal action through the HOA. I researched local regulations until my eyes burned. I delved into the dense, jargon-filled HOA guidelines, a document I'm convinced was designed to induce comas. I even consulted with a lawyer friend, just to cover all my bases, dot every I and cross every T in the structural integrity of my defense. Over the next few days, which stretched into a couple of intense weekends, I dedicated my evenings and every spare moment to the project. I ordered materials from a local supplier I trusted, carefully selecting each component for its strength and durability. Steel beams that could support a small car, not just a mailbox. Concrete mix of a specific grade, the kind you use for serious foundations. And, of course, a new, heavy-duty, yet aesthetically pleasing, mailbox was delivered to my house, much to the undisguised curiosity of my neighbors. Some of them, good folks mostly, stopped by to ask what I was up to, their eyes wide as they saw the scale of the materials piling up in my driveway. But I, Vaughn Royston, remained tight-lipped, offering only a cryptic smile and a vague, non-committal explanation about improving the property and ensuring long-term mail delivery security. I wasn't about to reveal my master plan just yet. I worked methodically, the way an engineer does, mixing concrete with precision, ensuring the water-to-cement ratio was perfect for maximum compressive strength, welding steel with a steady hand, the sparks flying like tiny, defiant stars in the dim light of my garage, assembling the structure piece by piece, each connection double-checked, each measurement verified. The garage filled with the satisfying sounds of power tools, the sharp tang of metal being worked, the earthy smell of curing concrete. It was a symphony of defiance. And in that work, I found a strange sense of satisfaction, a feeling of control in a situation that had previously felt so frustratingly unfair. I was taking matters into my own hands, quite literally building a solution to my problem, one bag of concrete, one steel rod at a time. As the structure began to take its final shape, a formidable yet surprisingly elegant creation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation, a sort of grim satisfaction. I knew, with absolute certainty, that Blythe, in her black SUV, would eventually test my creation. It was inevitable. And I, Vaughn Royston, and my mailbox, we were ready. I almost looked forward to it. I imagined her surprise, the jolt that would run through her luxury vehicle when it encountered something that didn't just give way with a whimper. I pictured the satisfying, resonant thwack of metal against something that wasn't going to move an inch. It wasn't about revenge, not really. Not in the petty sense. It was about sending a message. A clear, unambiguous, structurally sound message. Enough is enough, Blythe. Your reign of accidental terror over my mailbox ends here. But I also knew, deep down, that this was more than just a personal vendetta, more than just one man's crusade for an undamaged mailbox. It was about standing up to bullies everywhere. It was about challenging the abuse of power, however small the kingdom. It was about defending my property, yes, but also my peace of mind, my right to not have to inspect my curb for debris every time Blythe Carrington decided to grace Maplewood Lane with her presence. I was, in my own small way, setting an example for my neighbors, showing them that it was possible to resist, even against the most entrenched, rule-obsessed authority. I also understood, with a clarity that was both sobering and invigorating, that my actions would have consequences. Blythe wouldn't take this lying down. Not a chance. And I was prepared for whatever she might throw my way. I had done my research. I had covered my bases. I had built a mailbox that was not just a physical barrier against her reckless behavior, but a symbolic one too. However, even I couldn't predict the full extent of the fallout. The real test, the true measure of this neighborhood's character, was yet to come. And Vaughn Royston knew that Blythe's reaction, whatever form it took, would determine the next chapter in this escalating and, frankly, increasingly bizarre neighborhood drama. The weekend finally arrived, a bright, sunny Saturday that seemed to mock the underlying tension. And I, Vaughn Royston, was ready. My plan, my meticulously engineered solution, was no longer just a sketch on paper or a blueprint in my mind. It was a tangible, solid, gloriously over-engineered structure, sitting proudly at the edge of my property, a silent sentinel guarding the sanctity of my mail delivery. The reinforced mailbox was, if I may say so, a thing of beauty, at least to an engineer's eye. From a distance, it looked like any other mailbox in Crestview Estates, maybe a little more substantial, a little more present. A simple, unassuming black box with a cheerful red flag, standing at the perfect HOA-approved height and angle. Blended right in, if you didn't look too closely. But up close? Oh, up close it was a fortress. I had anchored the new steel post into a 3-foot-deep, steel-reinforced concrete foundation, poured and cured with the kind of precision I'd use for a skyscraper footing. Hidden within the seemingly standard wooden casing around the post was a solid steel frame, welded into an unbreakable core. The mailbox itself was heavy-duty, bolted securely. The exterior was painted a classic, HOA-approved white, of course, perfectly matching the neat picket fences and manicured lawns around it. It was the perfect disguise for something so incredibly tough, so designed to resist. That morning, I stood back and admired my work, a slow smile spreading across my face. The sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and the quiet neighborhood buzzed with the usual Saturday sounds. Children playing, lawnmowers humming in the distance, sprinklers hissing. Neighbors glanced curiously at the new mailbox as they walked their dogs or got their newspapers. Some admired the craftsmanship, offering a thumbs up. Others, I could tell, wondered if Vaughn Royston was finally making a statement, and perhaps secretly hoped he was. But I just paid them no mind, focused on what mattered most, standing my ground, literally. Later that day, right on cue, as if summoned by the sheer audacity of my creation, Blythe Carrington drove past Vaughn's house. Her black SUV, that symbol of her unchallenged authority, glided down the narrow street. She took the familiar curve near my property, perhaps a little more recklessly than usual, or maybe it just seemed that way to my heightened senses, just as she always did. But this time, folks, this time the outcome was different, spectacularly different. Instead of the usual sickening crunch of my mailbox bending or splintering, instead of the post leaning over in defeat, there was a solid, unyielding thwomp, followed by a sound that I can only describe as the tortured screech of expensive metal meeting its match. The front end of her SUV didn't just clip it, it collided with it. The reinforced steel held. The concrete didn't budge. Her vehicle, however, did. It crumpled, like a soda can being stomped on. The airbags deployed with a deafening hump, filling the car with a sudden, acrid burst of white powder. Blythe sat there, stunned for a long moment, I imagine. Her mascara, which was probably already struggling with the afternoon heat, was now likely streaked with tears of shock and fury. Her designer sunglasses, I pictured, were knocked crooked. When she finally opened the door and stepped out, wobbling slightly as she surveyed the significant and very expensive-looking damage to her pristine SUV, I was watching from my porch. I leaned against the railing, arms crossed, a cup of coffee, fresh this time, in my hand. I muttered to myself, though perhaps loud enough for the gentle breeze to carry my words. Guess the road wasn't the problem after all. Neighbors, drawn by the unmistakable noise of the collision and the subsequent hump of the airbags, sounds that definitely did not belong in the usual symphony of Crestview Estates, rushed out of their homes. Their curiosity, which had been simmering all morning, was now at a full boil. Some whispered about the sheer irony of the situation. The HOA president, the enforcer of all things proper, brought low by a mailbox. Others exchanged knowing, almost gleeful, looks. Blythe, usually so composed, so imperiously in command, was now visibly shaken, her facade of suburban perfection visibly cracked. She tried to regain her composure, brushing imaginary dirt from her no doubt expensive designer jacket and attempting to adjust her askew sunglasses with a trembling hand. I approached her calmly, my voice steady but firm, the voice of an engineer who knew his calculations were sound. Looks like your usual route just got a little less forgiving, Blythe. Her eyes flashed with a potent mix of embarrassment, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like dawning respect for solid engineering. "What do you think you're doing, Vaughn?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with indignation, but lacking its usual commanding tone. "This isn't over, Vaughn," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger first at her crumpled SUV and then at my gloriously unscathed mailbox. I remained calm, my expression, I hoped, unreadable. "It is if you stop hitting my mailbox, Blythe." The neighbors, who had by now formed a small, buzzing crowd, began to murmur among themselves. Some chuckled openly. Others gasped, perhaps at the audacity of it all, or maybe at the sheer, beautiful justice of the moment. This confrontation, right here on Maplewood Lane, was like a public spectacle, a real-life drama unfolding in the middle of their perfectly manicured, rule-abiding community. Among the onlookers was Martha Jenkins, a kind retiree who lived across the street. She had always found Blythe's strict enforcement of the HOA rules to be a bit excessive, and I knew she'd often whispered about the HOA president's hypocrisy with her friends over afternoon tea. Martha couldn't help but feel a sense of glee, a wide, unrestrained smile spreading across her face as she watched Blythe in such an uncharacteristic predicament. "Well, I must say, Blythe," Martha quipped, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush, unable to suppress a smile. "That's quite the dent. Looks like Vaughn's mailbox won this round." Blythe shot Martha a venomous look, a look that could curdle milk, before turning back to me, her face a mask of fury. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You knew I'd hit it." "I built a sturdy mailbox, Blythe," I responded evenly, my voice the epitome of reason. "If you hadn't been driving so carelessly, so entitled, frankly, this wouldn't have happened. Carelessly, Blythe scoffed, her voice rising. These roads are too narrow. Everyone knows that. It's a hazard. Then maybe you should drive slower, I suggested, my tone still infuriatingly calm. Or perhaps consider the fact that, out of all the mailboxes on this too narrow street, yours is the only vehicle that seems to have a recurring problem with my particular, and now very robust, mailbox. These accidents, as you call them, they seem to be a pattern of reckless behavior, wouldn't you say? The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Blythe realized, I think, that she was losing control of the situation, of her audience, of her carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. She needed to regain her authority, to reassert her dominance. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling slightly as she began to dial, her expression hardening into a mask of righteous indignation. I'm calling the police, she announced, her voice shrill. I'm pressing charges for property damage, and for creating a public nuisance. This mailbox is a menace. I simply shrugged. Go ahead, Blythe. I've done nothing wrong. My mailbox is on my property, and it meets all the local and HOA regulations. I made sure of that. I even had the documentation ready, just in case. Blythe's phone connected, and she began to explain the situation to the dispatcher, her voice a carefully crafted performance of distress and outrage. She exaggerated the details, of course, painting my mailbox as some kind of monstrous, aggressive structure that had leaped out to attack her innocent SUV. She portrayed herself as the victim, the diligent HOA president merely trying to navigate the treacherous, mailbox-infested streets of her own domain. As she spoke, her voice trembling with feigned emotion to convey her deep distress, I observed the gathering crowd, noticing the fascinating range of reactions. Some, the staunch Blythe loyalists, were clearly on her side, nodding sympathetically, their faces etched with concern for their leader and her damaged vehicle. They were the ones who believed in the HOA and its strict rules, probably because they benefited from them, or perhaps they just feared Blythe's wrath. Others, however, seemed sympathetic to me, recognizing the long-standing injustice of Blythe's repeated accidents and her blatant hypocrisy. These were the neighbors who had perhaps felt the sting of her selective enforcement themselves, the ones who had received those nitpicky letters about the wrong shade of rose bush or a slightly overgrown lawn. The arrival of the police cars, sirens respectfully silent as they pulled up to the curb, shattered the surreal tableau that had formed in Crestview Estates. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions neutral, professional, as they assessed the scene, the crumpled front end of Blythe's luxury SUV, and my proud, defiant, completely unscathed mailbox, a silent testament to the irresistible force meeting an immovable object. Or rather, an object designed to be exceptionally resistant to certain, predictable forces. Officer Miller, a young, clean-cut officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, approached Blythe first, his notebook already in hand. Ma'am, can you explain what happened here? Blythe, seizing the opportunity to play the victim to an official audience, launched into her well-rehearsed version of the story. She emphasized the narrowness of the road, the sudden, unexpected appearance of the dangerous obstruction, my mailbox apparently, and how she, a careful and conscientious driver, had simply been the unfortunate victim of circumstance and, implicitly, my malicious engineering. Officer Miller listened attentively, nodding occasionally as he took notes. But I knew, and I think some of the more discerning neighbors knew, that Blythe was twisting the truth, omitting her rather significant history of repeated accidents with my previous, far more fragile, mailboxes, and wildly exaggerating the danger posed by my current, compliant one. When Blythe finally finished her dramatic monologue, pausing for a theatrical, shaky breath, Officer Miller turned to me. Sir, do you have anything to add to that? I stepped forward, my demeanor, I hoped, projecting calm and respectful reason. Officer, I began, my voice steady. This is not the first time Miss Carrington has hit my mailbox. In fact, it's the 4th time in as many months. Each time, she claims it was an accident due to the narrowness of the road. I paused, letting that sink in, then gestured towards my new, robust mailbox. I built a sturdier mailbox to prevent further damage to my property and to ensure I could actually receive my mail. If Ms. Carrington had been driving responsibly, this incident would not have occurred. Officer Miller examined the mailbox closely, running his hand along its smooth, white exterior, probably noting its solid construction and the lack of any visible damage to it, in stark contrast to Blythe's vehicle. He glanced at Officer Jones, his older, more experienced partner, who had been quietly observing the scene with an expression that was hard to read, but hinted at a weary sort of amusement. Officer Jones approached Blythe, his expression stern. "Miss Carrington," he said, his voice firm but fair, "is it true that you've hit this mailbox, or rather, the previous mailboxes at this location, multiple times before?" Blythe hesitated for a moment, her carefully constructed composure faltering. "Well, yes," she admitted, her voice suddenly much smaller. "But it was always a minor thing. Just a little bump. These roads are treacherous. A little bump that required you to call the police today and claim property damage for what appears to be significant damage to your vehicle, while Mr. Royston's property remains intact." Officer Jones raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. The crowd's murmurs grew louder again, and several neighbors, emboldened by Officer Jones's line of questioning, began to share their own accounts of Blythe's spirited driving habits. Martha Jenkins spoke up, her voice clear and unwavering. "Officer, I've seen Miss Carrington speed around these corners countless times. She never slows down. It was only a matter of time before something like this happened, especially after Mr. Royston finally built a mailbox that could stand up to her." Other neighbors chimed in, corroborating Martha's statement, painting a picture of an HOA president who perhaps considered the neighborhood roads her personal racetrack. Blythe's carefully constructed image of suburban perfection, of being the blameless victim, was crumbling before her very eyes, much like the front end of her expensive SUV. Officer Miller and Officer Jones exchanged glances again, a silent communication passing between them. They seemed to realize that this was more than a simple traffic accident. It was a neighborhood dispute with deep-seated issues of fairness, power, and a history of unchecked behavior. Officer Jones turned back to Blythe, his voice now carrying a note of official finality. "Miss Carrington, I'm not going to issue a citation for property damage to Mr. Royston at this time, as his mailbox appears to be lawfully placed and, frankly, quite resilient. However, I am advising you, strongly, to drive more carefully in the future, especially on these residential streets. Repeated accidents, even with inanimate objects, suggest a pattern of reckless behavior that we take very seriously." Blythe's face flushed with a mixture of anger and profound humiliation. She glared at me, her eyes promising retribution, a silent vow of vengeance that I was fully prepared for. "This isn't over, Vaughn," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, before turning on her heel and stalking back to her now significantly less pristine SUV. I just smiled, a hint of genuine, unadulterated satisfaction in my eyes. "Maybe, Blythe," I called after her, "or maybe it's just the beginning of a new, more equitable era in Crestview Estates." The police officers, after taking a few more notes and ensuring no one was actually injured, apart from Blythe's pride and her vehicle's front end, wrapped up their investigation, advising both parties to resolve their dispute peacefully. As they drove away, the neighbors began to disperse, their conversations buzzing with speculation and a healthy dose of neighborhood gossip. The confrontation, this battle of the mailbox, had exposed the fault lines within Crestview Estates, revealing the simmering tensions beneath its pristine, rule-abiding surface. Blythe's authority, once unquestioned, had been publicly and, if I may say so, structurally challenged. And I, Vaughn Royston, the quiet engineer, had emerged as an unlikely hero, a symbol of resistance against the queen of selective enforcement. But Blythe, as I knew, was not one to accept defeat gracefully. Crestview Estates was her kingdom, and every challenge to her authority, however small, felt like a personal affront, a declaration of rebellion. I had a feeling this was far from over. After the HOA meeting where I had publicly questioned her leadership following one of the earlier mailbox incidents, Blythe had retreated to her office, a room I imagined was filled with perfectly organized files, binders labeled with HOA rules, and a large mahogany desk that had seen countless neighborhood disputes summarily adjudicated in her favor. Her mind, I was sure, was already racing with plans, with strategies to reassert her control. If Vaughn Royston wanted a battle, she would give him one, but it would be on her terms, fought in the shadowy bylaws and procedural minutiae of the HOA. She began by reviewing every possible bylaw, every regulation, every conceivable loophole she could use to put pressure on me. Minor infractions, no matter how trivial, would become ammunition in her fight to regain control and punish my insolence. Within days, I received a formal, very official-looking letter from the HOA, delivered with a flourish by a nervous-looking board member. It cited a violation of landscaping guidelines. The letter was precise, almost comically so, pointing out that a small, almost imperceptible patch of my lawn, near the now legendary Mailbox, didn't meet the exact, to the millimeter, height requirements specified in the HOA handbook. It was the kind of nitpicking that Blythe excelled at, a tactic designed to wear down her opponents through 1,000 tiny, infuriating paper cuts. I read the letter carefully, a wry smile playing on my lips. I had anticipated this. I had spent hours documenting every detail of my property, ensuring that I complied with every single rule, every guideline, every absurdly specific regulation. I wasn't about to let Blythe's petty tactics intimidate me. The next morning, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, which was, as expected, more heavily attended than usual. My calm demeanor, I hoped, contrasted sharply with the palpable tension in the room. Blythe was already there, of course, seated at the head of the table, her expression icy, her posture rigid. The room was packed with neighbors, some curious, others clearly divided in their loyalties, their faces a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly and addressed the crowd, my voice clear and measured. I want to talk about fairness and accountability. I began, looking directly at Blythe, then sweeping my gaze across the room. We all live here because we value this community, its order, and its property values. But that means rules should apply equally to everyone, not just some. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. Selective enforcement creates resentment and division. It's not about breaking rules, it's about how those rules are applied. I've done my best to comply with every guideline, every rule, yet I've been targeted repeatedly with frivolous complaints, like the recent one about a patch of grass being a few millimeters too tall. I held up the letter for emphasis. That's not justice. That's harassment. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, their expressions thoughtful. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with either me or Blythe. Blythe's lips pressed into a thin, white line, but I wasn't finished. I'm not here to cause trouble, I continued, my voice still calm, but carrying a new weight of conviction. I want us to work together to make Crestview Estates a place where respect and fairness are the foundation. If we can't do that, then what's the point of all these rules? What's the point of an HOA that doesn't serve all its members equally? The room erupted into a cacophony of murmurs and whispers. Some applauded quietly. Others exchanged skeptical, worried glances. Blythe cleared her throat, her attempt at a dismissive sound. Rules are rules, Vaughn, she responded, her voice tight with barely suppressed fury. We all agreed to them when we moved here. It's about maintaining order and property values. Your structure was a clear provocation. My structure, Blythe, I corrected gently, is a mailbox. A mailbox that, unlike its predecessors, can withstand repeated impacts from, shall we say, less than careful drivers. It is fully compliant with all regulations. The issue here isn't my mailbox. It's the selective application of rules and the misuse of your position to target a resident you happen to disagree with. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but my words, I could tell, had made an impact. The community was beginning to question the status quo, to look more critically at how their HOA was being run. Blythe's iron grip on authority, her carefully cultivated image of infallibility, was loosening ever so slightly. Outside the meeting hall, as residents slowly dispersed, their conversations still buzzing, several neighbors approached me, their expressions a mixture of admiration and trepidation. They offered quiet words of encouragement, a shared glance of understanding. Martha Jenkins smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling. You're doing the right thing, Vaughn, she said, her voice firm. Someone had to stand up to her. It's about time. But I also felt the weight of the conflict. I knew this was far from over, that Blythe, with her pride wounded and her authority challenged, would continue to push back, to find new ways to exert her influence. Still, I was ready. My stand, which had started with a simple, repeatedly damaged mailbox, was now about something much larger. It was about fairness, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost, no matter how powerful the opposition. And as I walked home that evening, past my defiant, indestructible mailbox, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The battle wasn't over, but I had drawn my line in the concrete. The mounting pressure from Blythe Carrington and her HOA allies was intense, no doubt about it. The official letters, the thinly veiled threats of fines, the surprise inspections, it was a relentless campaign designed to wear me down, to make me regret ever challenging her. But I, Vaughn Royston, remained steady. I understood, with a clarity that surprised even myself, that this wasn't just about a mailbox or a dented SUV anymore. It was about standing up against selective enforcement and the blatant misuse of power, however small the stage. One evening, after a particularly long and frustrating day at work, I sat at my kitchen table, the warm glow of the setting sun filtering through the window. I was reviewing the latest stack of official-looking letters and notices I had received from the HOA, each one more nitpicky, more absurdly trivial than the last. A supposed violation for the color of my welcome mat, apparently sunset orange, was not an approved earth tone. A warning about the height of a single, slightly ambitious sunflower in my backyard. It was clear Blythe was digging deep, searching for any infraction, however minor, to justify her escalating harassment. But I had anticipated this. I had spent hours, weeks even, documenting every single detail of my property, taking photographs, cross-referencing every item against the convoluted HOA handbook. I ensured that I complied with every rule, every guideline, every maddeningly specific regulation down to the approved species of ornamental grass for front yard borders. I wasn't about to let Blythe's tactics intimidate me or catch me on a technicality. My defense was as solid as the foundation of my new mailbox. The next morning, Vaughn Royston attended the monthly HOA meeting, a battlefield I was becoming increasingly familiar with. My calm demeanor, I hoped, stood in stark contrast to the simmering tension that filled the community center. Blythe was, as always, already there, enthroned at the head of the long table, her expression an icy mask of composure, her posture radiating an unyielding, if slightly frayed, authority. The room was packed, more so than usual, with neighbors eager to witness the latest chapter in the ongoing saga. Some were curious, their eyes darting between me and Blythe. Others were clearly divided in their loyalties, their faces betraying a mixture of support, skepticism, and outright fear of crossing the HOA president. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, deliberately, and addressed the assembled group, my voice resonating with a quiet conviction that I hoped cut through the nervous energy. Rules are important. I began, my gaze sweeping across the room, lingering for a moment on Blythe's stony face. They provide structure, maintain order, and protect our shared property values. We all agree on that. However, I paused, ensuring I had everyone's attention. They must be applied fairly, consistently, to everyone. Selective enforcement, the kind we've been witnessing, breeds resentment and division. It undermines the very trust that holds a community together. My words struck a chord with many. I could see it in their expressions. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces showing a flicker of relief, perhaps, that someone was finally saying what they had been thinking. Others, Blythe's staunchest supporters, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their disapproval palpable. Blythe's lips pressed into an even thinner line, a silent testament to her mounting fury. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't here to cause trouble, not for trouble's sake. I want us to work together, I continued, my voice earnest, to make Crestview Estates a place where respect and fairness are the foundation of our community. A place where everyone is treated equally, where everyone has a voice, and where no one is targeted or harassed for simply expecting the rules to apply to all, including those in positions of authority. If we can't achieve that, then what, truly, is the point of all these meticulously crafted rules and regulations? The room erupted into a low hum of murmurs and whispers. Some applauded quietly, a small act of defiance in itself. Others exchanged skeptical, worried glances, perhaps wondering what Blythe's retribution would look like this time. Blythe herself cleared her throat, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Rules are rules, Vaughn," she reiterated, her voice tight, betraying none of the composure she was so desperately trying to project. "We all agreed to abide by them when we moved into this esteemed community. It's about maintaining impeccable order and, more importantly, our consistently high property values. Your creation was a deliberate and unsightly provocation." "My creation, Blythe," I corrected, my tone still remarkably even, "is a mailbox. A mailbox that, unlike its many unfortunate predecessors, has proven it can withstand repeated impacts from, shall we say, less than attentive drivers. It is, I assure you, and this board, fully compliant with every single local and HOA regulation. I have the documentation to prove it. The issue here, as I see it, isn't the structural integrity of my mailbox. It's the selective and, dare I say, vindictive application of rules and the questionable use of your esteemed position to target a resident with whom you seem to have a personal disagreement." The meeting eventually ended, as these things often do, with no clear, immediate resolution. But my words, I knew, had resonated. They had planted a seed of doubt, a question of fairness, in the minds of many. The community, once so placid on the surface, was beginning to question the status quo, to look more critically at the way their HOA and its president wielded power. Blythe's once iron grip on authority, her carefully cultivated image of unassailable perfection, was undeniably loosening, showing cracks under the pressure of consistent, reasoned resistance. Outside the community meeting hall, as the residents slowly dispersed, their conversations still buzzing with the day's drama, a surprising number of neighbors approached me. They didn't just offer sympathetic glances anymore. They offered quiet words of encouragement, a handshake, a shared nod of understanding. Martha Jenkins, my ever-supportive neighbor from across the street, smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of pride and relief. "You're doing the right thing, Vaughn," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Someone, for a very long time, has needed to stand up to her. It's truly about time our community valued fairness above all else." But even as I accepted their support, I also felt the profound weight of the ongoing conflict. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was far, far from over. Blythe Carrington, a woman whose entire identity seemed wrapped up in her position and her ability to control, would not simply concede defeat. She would continue to push back, to find new, more insidious ways to exert her influence, to punish me for my defiance. Yet I was ready. My stand, which had begun with a simple, repeatedly mangled mailbox, had evolved into something much larger, something much more significant. It was about fairness, yes. It was about respect. But most importantly, it was about the fundamental courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the personal cost, no matter how entrenched or seemingly powerful the opposition. And as I walked home that evening, the setting sun casting a warm, almost hopeful glow on my street, past my defiant, beautifully over-engineered, and still perfectly intact mailbox, I felt a sense of profound peace, a quiet resolve I hadn't experienced in months. The battle was far from won, but I had drawn my line, not just in the sand, but in solid, reinforced concrete. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't standing there alone. The whispers of change were finally starting to echo through the once silent streets of Crestview Estates.